I'd like to welcome everyone to the 2021 AIA Utah Connect, Collaborate, and Celebrate Hybrid Conference. My name is Robert Pignon with MHTN Architects, and I'm currently the president-elect for the Utah chapter. As such, I'm the chair of the conference this year and would like to thank all of you for joining us here virtually and in person. And we have set up quite the weeks-long worth of activities for you, hoping to bring us closer together during these times as we transition in this pandemic era. We'd like to kick off by recognizing and thanking the sponsors for this event. And without their financial support, we wouldn't be able to do this. A special thank you to our platinum sponsor, Alder Sales Corporation, our gold sponsors, BHB Structural Engineers, Hogan Construction, Steelcase Midwest Commercial, and Reevely Engineers. Thank you to our silver sponsors, Steel Encounters and Wadman Corporation, and our print sponsor, SBR Technologies. We are here in the Wadman Center at AIA Utah headquarters, and we have people present here as well as virtually. So at this point, we'd like to turn the time over to our platinum sponsor, Corey Alder, and he will address us for a couple minutes, after which we will turn the time over to Phil Hatterley, our AIA Utah chapter president.
I'd like to thank AIA Utah for the opportunity to help sponsor this annual conference. Alders has had a long history of working with and supporting AIA Utah. Through this, we have developed lasting relationships with AIA. This organization has been of great importance to our company and to the community as well. The ideals that the AIA supports of a better built environment benefit us all. Alders has been in this community for over 86 years now. We have deep roots here in the state of Utah. So we are proud to call this place our home and to do our small part in helping make Utah a better and more sustainable place to live. I represent the fourth generation. My goal is to provide a company that will continue on for more and more generations. I know many firms here listening and watching today have this same goal. We can only do this by building sustainable buildings and standing up for our homes. We will continue to support the AIA and all its endeavors. We have the same desire for a better community, a better built environment, and a better climate. Thank you for all your time and supporting all this support of this.
Thank you, Corey. Just 1 second there, Phil. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us on our conference this week. We're really excited for all the events that we have. We're also very grateful for all of our sponsors and our conference organizing committee that has done so much work on the conference this week. So I wanted to introduce our opening keynote speaker, Peter Exley. AIA, I think you're a fellow actually now, right, Peter? Yeah, so FAIA. Peter has served as in the AIA in a number of different roles, including as the at-large director of the AIA Board, the chair of AIA's Public Outreach Committee, the 2013 president of AIA Chicago, and he is currently serving as our 2021 national AIA president. He's the co-founder and director of internationally recognized architecture design and consulting firm called Architecture is Fun, which is based in Chicago. The practice is centered on elevating the standards of design for learning and play environments for children, families, and communities. It was recognized as AIA Chicago Firm of the Year in 2017. Dedicated to helping the next generation of architects, Exley has also been an adjunct professor at the School of Art Institute of Chicago for more than 25 years. He earned a Master's of Architecture degree from the University of Pennsylvania and a Bachelor of Arts in Architectural Studies from Newcastle University. So welcome, Peter. Would love to hear from you today.
Thanks, Phil. Those remarks finished just as I think either the police department or an ambulance is flying by. So apologies if that's louder than me at any point today. So Phil, thank you. I happen to be the 97th president of the American Institute of Architects. I want to really congratulate AIA Utah for reaching its centenary this year. You might not have been there 100 years ago, but you are the stewards now, and your role is as critical members all over the state. And if you're like me, you're putting in 60 or 70 hours every week for your clients. Phil, I'd like to thank you and the conference committee, everybody at AIA Utah for inviting me to this conference, which I think was almost 10 months ago now when we first talked about this in January. Thinking back to January, I remember one of the first talks I gave as AIA president was to the members of AIA San Antonio. I said then that COVID has challenged all of us to connect in new ways. This was pre-vaccine and very much in the throes of Zoom fatigue, which some of us are obviously still suffering from now, although hopefully not for the next hour. What I said back then to San Antonio remains relevant today, post-vaccine. COVID has challenged all of us to connect in new ways across the ecosystem of our industry, across project teams, with our clients and with our contractors and subcontractors. As someone who teaches, it's definitely changed the way students learn about architecture. We've all been challenged to redefine our outlook, the circumstances of our lives, and our attitude towards the word community. I think many of us have found community is not just a word, and it's not just a thing we sign up for or identify with. Community is a living thing, and it needs to be nurtured as it nurtures us. So if a lot has changed in the last 10 months, I'll touch on that in a minute. I also think that a lot still remains the same, including the growing conviction that our sense of community matters as much as the communities we belong to and the ones that we design for. So that's the theme for my talk today. What matters? What matters? Well, let's start with the who before we get to the what. And I'll beg that you hold your applause, your virtual applause, when I say this. You matter because architects matter. That's why I became one, and that's why I'm the president of the AIA. Architects create places where people live their lives. Architects create places where we experience the things that make us happy and help us learn and help us prosper. We are architects because we know how to create greener and more equitable spaces. And we are here today because we understand what it means for people to live their lives in those spaces. Let me repeat myself because this bears repeating. Architects create places where people live their lives. Consider the power of that act. Consider the responsibility of our vocation. But we have work to do to shore up our communities. People already know that architects matter, and they are starting to see why that's true. I think I have a responsibility to ourselves to demonstrate why that's true, what matters now. When all of us as architects get together, we can do good things in an interconnected and mutually supportive way. For instance, the AIA's Climate Action Plan has 3 overarching goals: mitigation, adaptation, and the one that's really relevant to my remarks today, which centers on catalyzing every architect to act in the interest of their respective communities. That includes the 2030 commitment, which you're all familiar with. That includes design for equitable communities, one of the 10 impact areas of AIA's framework for design excellence. And this includes the AIA's guides for equitable practice, which I personally think reflects some of the finest work we've ever undertaken as an institute. Individually, these are really fine initiatives, but together and as supportive agendas, they become actionable plans. I'll be totally honest with you when I say that the AIA is rarely accused of being a disruptive force, perhaps when RK was president. However, I have seen momentum, and I think that these initiatives I just mentioned are worthy of your accusations of disruption. They're worthy because they're useful. They're worthy because they're united by a mission. And they're worthy because they build on the work of two generations, architects who've been working since the late 1960s on energy, wind, diversity, equity, and to create a profession that is capable of transforming. I started this year speaking to members all over the country and the world about design as a disruptive force. I believe design is disruption, and I also believe disruption is necessary right now because the status quo isn't working. As we approach the end of the year, I still believe that design must disrupt the status quo. The good news is there are a lot of people that aren't so happy with the status quo either. What we're talking about here are the very structures of our society. What we're talking about is inequity, and it doesn't take an architecture degree to know why inequity is structural. It doesn't take any degree really to show how inequity pushes down women, people of color, indigenous cultures, foreign nationals, Americans of the poorest quintiles, Americans experiencing homelessness, and Americans who are differently abled. As a structural phenomenon, inequity is economic in America, right? Inequity is cultural in America too, even if equality is enshrined in our laws. But I've refused to believe that inequity must be architectural. Even if architecture possesses hierarchies, and even if architectural programs must be prioritized and ordered, I refuse to believe that inequity must be a byproduct of the architecture itself. We've covered what and who, so let's talk about where this matters. And I'm here today to talk to you as an architect. As architects, we are uniquely positioned to do something good, something that makes people safer and healthier. We are uniquely positioned to create spaces and places that privilege no one and serve everyone at the same time. That has to do with making high-performance design and construction a widely accessible topic. To that end, I think the Building Resilience podcast that AIA Utah launched is a perfect way to get into people's headphones and let them know that we all deserve buildings that work for us. That has to do with affordable, sustainable housing. And I think the Empowered Living Design Competition in Salt Lake City will be more than a conversation starter along these lines. I think it will help alleviate some of the home price pressures in a desirable region of the country. And that has to do with understanding the racial and cultural dimensions of our profession and revealing everyone so that we can all be counted. You may know this, but in 2020, the American Collegiate Schools of Architecture, ACSA, launched a series called Where Are My People?, which explores diversity and representation within architecture in a more granular way than has ever been achieved before. So that's identifying Black, Latinx and Hispanic, Asian American, Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander, Native and Indigenous Middle Eastern and North African. Believe it or not, the ecosystem of architecture had never been counting these individuals properly at all until now. So this is much an effort around who as it is around where. Where indeed are my people? It's a question that matters. As I said before, however, we have work to do. So now let's talk about when. Let's talk about now, and let's talk about it on the road to 2030 and beyond. Nearly every American city offers evidence that we're a nation caught between poverty and prosperity. We're caught between an environmental crisis we helped create and a building stock that produces 40% of carbon emissions that we most certainly helped create. This in-between status is a place where a lot of American cities right now. In architecture, we call this a liminal space. It's an unresolved space for some. For others, including me, it's a space that's full of opportunity. And we have the opportunity to fix it. We have the opportunity to tip the scale towards prosperity and to define a future for our cities and each other. Not to mention the people you'll never meet, but whose lives are defined by your work. Look at cities like South Bend, Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Atlanta for four dramatic examples of transformation, half a century after we all thought their stories were set in stone. The National Academy of Sciences just published a research report that shows Atlanta stands a very good chance of reducing its carbon emissions 50% by 2030. Detroit, a 30% reduction by 2025, and hopefully 100% by 2050. The Utah Climate Action Network endorsed the roadmap published by the University of Utah early last year, which calls for reducing carbon emissions by 50% below levels seen a generation ago over the next 9 years. I could go on, but each one of those goals requires an architect's thinking. Each one of those goals requires the broad commitment of the architectural profession. A decade ago, Lance Hosey, whose death last month was such a tragic loss for architecture and sustainability, asked us all to consider, if the impact of architecture weren't hidden, how would the public react? If buildings' environmental impact were clearer, would we demand greater change? Citing a noticed psychologist, he talked about these questions in terms of morality. I'll not lecture you on morals. I won't even try. I will say, however, that the imperatives that morality suggests, such as do this or don't do that, are scorned because of the relative way we all approach morality. As I said, I'm not here to lecture you on morals. I can't tell you how many times I've zigged when I should have zagged. I do think that architecture has an imperative, though, which I'll call a design ethic. Now we're going beyond what matters and getting into why it matters. So why does it matter? If you follow me on this, and if you can imagine what a design ethic may mean, you can see what the future of ethical and equitable architecture looks like. You can begin to see that sustainable design must begin with you, me, and anyone else who practices architecture. You can imagine a future in which architects, as the only government-regulated professionals in the construction industry, can be the primary and credible resources with the explicit training and qualification to lead the creation of a net zero built environment. I believe that every single architecture school graduate today should have the tools and to understand how to create zero carbon buildings. You can imagine the size of the investment that companies and schools will make to meet the challenges of climate action. You can imagine the size of the investment required to meet the burden of responsibility that architects share. You can also imagine the size of the investment we must all make in each other to make sure we're all counted, to make sure we're all practicing fairly and equitably. If equitable design shapes our citizenry and if climate action will save our cities, then the final thing I want to talk about is what I call a continuum of agency. This is really the why. A continuum of agency means you, me, and everyone when we all realize that there is no material difference in our vocations, in our stations of life, in our geographies, in our professional outlooks, or even in the things we make, from steel bolts to whole buildings. A continuum of agency means it is incumbent upon all of us to champion fairness and health and spaces that privilege no one and everyone at the same time. Sustainability is a vehicle to do this. If we're on this continuum of agency, then we must be in agreement and we must coordinate and we must act. Here are 3 good examples of ways we as an organization are going to act. First, AI National is, as many of you know, headquartered in a 50-year-old building that is too expensive to maintain and far, far from ideal from an employee health perspective. But it's an extraordinary asset for the organization, and we have hatched a plan to reinvest in it. More than that, we're going to make it the most important project in America this decade for architects. It will define what architects are capable of. It will be immediately net zero. And it will build community within the organization's ranks and among Washingtonians who pass by on the street. It will be the most attractive and healthy place to work in the entire country. Secondly, the guides for equitable practice, which I mentioned before, are a vital part of AIA's commitment to ensure architecture is a welcoming and inclusive profession that can attract the best and the brightest to follow. And that's to follow through on the who, what, when, and why I've been talking about today. The guides for equitable practice were done in partnership with the University of Washington and the University of Minnesota and the American Institute of Architects Equity and the Future of Architecture Committee. As a partnership between Architecture's Academy and its profession, the guides not only help firms attract and retain a diverse workforce, but they also sustain that workforce now and in generations from now. If you've not downloaded them, they are the most amazing, amazing documents. And I believe they are an extraordinary opportunity for your practices. And then thirdly, the AIA's framework for design excellence represents the defining principles of good design in the 21st century. The framework is 10 principles that offer a map to a zero carbon, equitable, resilient, and healthy built environment. They're intended for architects and designers, but they're also intended for clients and owners. To that end, the framework for design excellence is intended to be accessible and relevant for every architect, every client, and every project, regardless of size, typology, or aspiration. As you celebrate 100 years this year, consider what you want the 200th anniversary to look like for AIA Utah. I began by recognizing you as AIA Utah stewards because I consider myself a steward and as representative for your members and your colleagues who are in Legion. It has been gratifying to be serving in that role this year. Thinking back to January, a whole lot has changed, but among the things that remain the same is the sense of purpose architects represent. Sitting between owners and contractors, sitting between those who will experience your spaces now and 20 years from now. Sitting along the continuum of agency I mentioned before, on climate, on race, on place, and on 100 other things that mattered. Architects work in purposeful ways. They have to because there is a lot at stake. And that's what matters most. It's a real pleasure to join you today. Thank you. And perhaps now you can ask a few questions of me as president, and hopefully I've got some good answers for you.
Thank you, Peter. Again,
Thanks, Phil.
we'd like to just ask people to put their questions in the Q&A, and we'll read them in an orderly manner. And if there's anyone here in the audience at the AIA headquarters that has any questions for Peter, I'd like to take those now. Looks like Jared Ma may have a question. Let me start the video. No, you can come up to.
Hey, Jared.
Hi, Peter. How are you doing?
Good, thanks.
It's good to hear from you again.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, virtually.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about the AIA Build Block. I know we've talked about it as a board here on the state, but I haven't heard much from national lately, and maybe I just haven't been on the right venues. But how is that coming? Build the block.
Okay. So Build the Block is an initiative that the public outreach team, part of the Blueprint for Better team, put together and worked on probably in 2019 and 2020, early in the year. And what Build a Block is, it's intended for use as a great K through 12 tool. Initially, it was rolled out as a tablet-based interactive experience. And in a live or in a virtual setting, it allowed several individuals, school children, for instance, to engage in a role-playing game to design a building in their community. And that role-playing required somebody to play the mayor of the city, and then an assortment of stakeholders in the community, including contractors, and of course, an architect is involved in that conversation. And after about an hour or so, that group will end up with a building design in their community based on their priorities. And it would be supported by a whole series of precedents by precedents of buildings around the country, many of them AIA award-winning projects, and all projects that relate in some way to the AIA's framework for design excellence. And so I think around the country, Build the Block is something that is available to components to borrow or to download. I believe that as it stands right now, whilst we have a tablet or a series of tablets that can be borrowed from National and returned, and I believe it's been ported over so it can be accessible on a browser version. So I think this is just something that hopefully component leaders will bring, and hopefully we'll see it used by AIA Utah real soon if it hasn't already been used. Is that a good outline? Is that?
That's great. That's perfect, actually. Thank you so much. Love your jacket, by the way.
Thank you. For anybody that wants to read a little bit more about it, if you search Build the Block on AIA.org, there are a couple of articles up there about it. And I think if you contact Caitlin Reagan at National AIA or Gabby Suarez, they can provide access for you. So perhaps as component leaders, feel free to reach out. And if you can't get hold of it, feel free just to email me and I'll put you in touch.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it, Peter.
Peter, I did have a question. I love the optimism that AI has about our climate situation and about equity, and just that we do have the ability to do it. Sometimes I feel maybe a little bit overwhelmed with just the size of the, I don't know, it just seems like a big undertaking. What do you say to people who are trying to get started with that?
Yeah, I feel the same way. I'm a small practice. Things like reporting, looking at the DDX and looking at 2030. Perhaps sometimes take more resources than one can manage or appear to do so. I think a really great place to start, though, is by looking at the framework for design excellence. And I think the more that you look at that, the more you will recognize there are things that you are habitually doing in your projects with your clients on a day-to-day basis. And framing your work through that, and perhaps starting to collect data associated with that, is probably a really great first step as you make that commitment to, well, frankly, hopefully all of us making the 2030 commitment, as we get towards that milestone. So I think at a personal and at a practice level, I think that framework for design excellence is a real great and accessible building block. And hopefully you'll see the Institute also start to embrace or continue to embrace and provide you with the types of materials, programming, and talking points that are going to give you access to have that conversation in your community. Later in the year, I'm hoping, COVID permitting, and COVID protocols permitting, to be at the United Nations COP26 conference in Glasgow. This is the follow-up conference to Paris, where the accord was made on climate action. AIA has been invited as a delegate. We have a seat at that table. And in the coming months, we're going to be talking to members and positioning AIA architects as members of every community that are ideally placed to present solutions that is going to take us forward in the built environment. And I think you're going to see, and as we already know, architects most definitely have a seat at that table. But the fact that we are alongside the rest of the delegates with people from around the world, I think speaks volumes about the role we have to play. And frankly, I'm flattered and optimistic and excited that the UN and all of their partners see that architects have a role to play too. So I think there are some macro and micro things that are happening in the Institute. The framework provides every architect, I think, with accessible tools. And then hopefully in return, AIA as an organization is having the most important conversations at the most important venues at the most important times.
Great.
And hopefully you'll be bragging that AIA is at COP26. I mean, I think that's a big deal. Definitely something that, as I talk to mayors around the country, the US Conference of Mayors, the Mayors Innovation Initiative, they're at that table, but they also want architects at the table in their cities too, to help them with the challenges that affect them on a local basis.
I thank you for somehow you did your research and you found out that we've been trying to make some small steps on with our COAT committee and their podcast, and also our Empowered Living Design competition, which has gone into a kind of international competition, which is really exciting for us. We're working hard to do those things that I guess that shows the community overall the influence that architects can have. And I thought it just came out of us wanting to be better connected to the city. And as we had a meeting with the city and said, hey, what can we do as architects? Then they brought this wonderful opportunity to us to help them to organize this design competition. We're still kind of in the middle of it, but what are some other ways that you've seen or that you've done yourself to help, I guess, get architects more involved and connected within their communities?
Yeah, just last week, I gave out 3 awards to communities in Virginia, Tennessee, and Michigan. Blacksburg, Virginia, the mayor there is creating an innovation incubator. And through a grant from the mayor's innovation team and AIA, we've gotten architects there to sit down with the mayors there, or with the mayor there, and to be talking about what that innovation incubator could be and how that can be a catalyst for like-minded projects throughout the city. I don't know that it necessarily needs a grant always to do that, but that brings profile to this, and it certainly gets the attention of those mayors who are using social media to brag that they're working with architects on these critical places, often in their downtown areas that have seen better days, and they're really trying to catalyze a rebirth. I think other things that we've been doing that have been getting great visibility for architects in the community has been the AIA Film Challenge also. And hopefully there are entries from AIA Utah members this year. Hopefully perhaps we'll be seeing some winners and some great films from your region in the coming months. You know, we live in a day and age where social media and sound bites, TikTok and the likes are everywhere. And architects should really embrace that social media and that visual media. I think the film challenges have been one really amazing way in which we've been able to do that. If you look back over the 6 years of the film challenge, it's actually transformed itself from a competition that required a filmmaker and a considerable amount of time to put together a really professional film. But in the last 2-3 years, somewhat precipitated by COVID, we've by design and just through circumstance, we've had to adjust that competition to be accessible to anybody who's got a mobile device in their pocket. Everybody carries around a little film studio with them. If you look at the results of this year's AIA Film Challenge, I would challenge you to compare the quality of this year's films with those that were made 6 years ago. It's a different time, to be sure, but the films that are being made right now by AIA members and talking about their work, they're amazing. Imagine if we were communicating like that, disrupting our own film challenge, so to speak. So it transformed from something that previously was not accessible to everybody to something that is accessible to everybody right now. Imagine if we were doing that with our honors and awards programs. Imagine if we were doing it, there's a multitude of ways in which we can disrupt ourselves. We're making ourselves more accessible. We're telling our stories about what architects do in a way that starts to measure the impact they have on our communities. And hopefully our communities are going to sit up and stand up and listen and have an even greater desire to work with architects. So I think, that your competition and looking at tiny homes there, that the fact that that's turned into an international competition, that's unexpected, that's disruption. And hopefully, this is the AIA that you're going to see more and more.
Absolutely. Are there any other questions in the chat? I don't see any. Robert, do you have any questions there? Any additional questions?
I don't have any new questions. Hold on, we do, Phil, we do have one. Let me do it up here, just 1 second.
Peter, thank you for your remarks. I really find that the opportunity of doing the AIA national office and using that as a disruptor in the design. Just wondered if you could speak any more about that and where that is and what's kind of happening with that.
So the AIA board hired an architect earlier this year and a construction manager at risk. So we're working with EHDD out of San Francisco and with Turner Construction. Walter Hood, landscape architect, is also participating in this. And their team is putting together right now, they're just wrapping up their concept design phase. And we'll be presenting that to the board in October. And we've just started again on AIA.org to publish a little bit of information about that. There are a couple of articles on the existing building there. One of the things that has really excited me about this early project And the project has been managed on AIA's behalf by Stephen Ayres. Some of you, I'm sure, will have met Stephen at AIA events around the country, but Stephen was the architect of the Capitol for about a decade, and currently he's managing this project on behalf of AIA. One of the initiatives that we set up was a collaboration with the historic Black colleges and universities, the HBCUs, and we recently hired 6 interns from HBCUs and planted them in the client teams, in the architectural team, and in the construction management team, so that these students, midway through their studies, were getting access and engaging with the architects, the contractors, and the clients who are working on this really important building. And last week they presented 2 weeks ago, they presented projects and observations that they got credit for, they got paid for, to members of the building team and to the AIA headquarters building committee. As I think about that as an act that is scalable and is disruptive, you could imagine that every single project that every architect is working on at any time might, either for a few hours or a few weeks or a few months, make that same kind of investment and invite the client themselves and the contractor to invite students from architecture schools to just come and spend a little bit of time and see how that house project down the street from them, or how that healthcare project at the heart of their campus, or that new city hall that's being built, any project type, that would be an amazing thing to do. And the outcomes of inviting those students to work on the AIA headquarters renovation has been really a profound experience for them, but also a profound experience for those of us involved in the project. And hopefully their involvement in this project will be yet further impetus for them to be excited and optimistic about their role in the future profession of architecture. So lots going on with the building. And frankly, an amazing team and an amazing engineering team who are just so spectacularly confident about the potential of the building's future performance relative to what it is today. And frankly, if we can do that with this building, and you look at the stock of construction from the 1970s around the country, hopefully we're going to demonstrate how to create future-proof, resilient, sustainable structures from our existing building stock. And that is going to be an opportunity for America's architects.
All right, Peter, I've got a question in the Q&A. This is from Keith Diaz-Moore, who is our Dean of the College of Architecture and Planning at the University of Utah. And I'm going to switch the camera here in our actual space, as you can see over in the background. His question is, as you well may know, AIA Utah has a unique collaborative space shared with ASLA Utah and our College of Architecture and Planning at the University of Utah. You can see it there in the background. The question is, how would you imagine possibilities of such a space to catalyze meaningful discussion between community, professionals, and students about both the AI Design Excellence Framework and the Guide to Equitable Practices you have mentioned?
Well, thank you, Keith. It sounds like you've already described it, and you've worked it out in your head. There are some revisions coming out to the guides to equitable practice later this year that can be applied specifically and are going to be tailored for the academy, and also one for associations. So AIA components, I suppose. Although if you're familiar with the guides to equitable practice, you can see that they're applicable universally. And it's a lovely instance where I think you're seeing architects take a lead here and being a benchmark for other professions and other industries. One of the things that I've been saying to my students, and hopefully I'm not avoiding your question here, but that there's perhaps been a historic tendency for our graduates to go into architectural practice as apprentices, and perhaps to be putting in time, and a lot of that may involve technical input and digital input using CAD or BIM software, and they're the go-tos in the office for that mundane work. What I'm hoping that we're seeing in the current crop and the future crop of graduates is students that are, as I said earlier, who are going to be armed with the knowledge to create net zero buildings, carbon zero buildings, that they will be the ones that will walk into offices and literally just slap on the table the guides for equitable practice and alert our traditional practices, and that's my practice included, as to the opportunity that presents itself. So my hope is that physical or virtual spaces, the way that we teach, that the curriculum that needs to adjust is going to modify so that it can be practical training for many of the things that I've described, and presumably, the many things that are already happening in your center. But it needs a little bit of a revolution in the academy, I think, to do that. And I'd love to see the academy taking a lead. I was surrounded. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's an incredible opportunity that we have to have the students in their design studio directly embedded within the AIA Utah office. And it's something that the pandemic has kind of hampered a little bit to get that face-to-face collaboration. But I think there's an amazing opportunity there for us to, as professionals, can get kind of intermingled with the students. We can kind of share with them the things that are important to us as they're coming into the profession. We can share with them these AIA guidelines, and really look forward to the day when we're much more integrated with the academic side of things as well as the professional side.
Yeah. I love that somebody's put the link up there for the film challenge. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah. Anything else there, Robert, from the home office?
I don't have any other questions or questions here in person. Thank you.
We wanted to thank you, Peter, for joining us. And if you have a little bit of time, we'll let people maybe jump on their cameras and say hi at the end here, just since we don't have any other questions. But thanks so much for joining us and for being willing to share your thoughts. It's really exciting to hear kind of where the AIA is going and kind of the reach that we have to make a difference in the world. I think it's encouraging and it's an exciting time to be an architect. We have a lot of challenges, but also opportunities, I think, to make the world better just through the power of design.
Yeah, it's an amazing time to be an architect. I like you, I'm saying that all the time. It's so exciting, and to be part of the world's largest organization dedicated to design. We shouldn't be surprised that we are invited to some of the tables that we are, but we also have to sometimes, try that door and walk in, knock on that mayor's knock on the mayor's door. And typically they're very pleased to see us.
Does anybody want to pop on the camera and say hi to Peter?
This is how popular I am.
I wonder if the cameras are, people can share their cameras or not. Looks like we've got 13 people that nobody's sharing. That's all right. Invitations there.
I see there's a question about being a small firm practitioner.
From Bruce Fallon, yes.
So
Go ahead and read that.
So as a small firm practitioner, what have I learned about the AIA during my service as president about the role of small firms in the AIA and the power of small firms? I often say that I was tricked into AIA leadership and service. I've always participated in task force or committees through AIA Chicago. And I think, that's how most of us engage through our local components. And I've always been really excited about what AIA does as a local component, but nationally it was somewhat mysterious. I was tricked by a friend to joining the AIA Chicago board, and I was president in 2013, which was a very, very rewarding experience. What I found that at every juncture, you are typically in AIA surrounded by an extraordinary group of colleagues and leaders, whether that's on a local or a state or a national board. And even more profound is the exemplary staff that you have around you. So one thing that is very different from my currently firm of 2 people is that at AIA, I'm surrounded by an organization of 220 staff in DC, and it's extraordinary the work that we can do together. I have not found being a small practitioner to be an impediment to leading and to taking on this role. My partner, who is also my wife, takes issue with something I say very often. I say I spend 1/3 of my time in practice, 1/3 of my time teaching, and 1/3 of my time in service and leadership. She's taken issue with that service and leadership 1/3 this year. And she's probably right. She's certainly right on that. But in spite of that, my clients are loving that their architect is participating in an organization as venerated and as credible as AIA. And so they have on occasion this year cut me a little bit of slack. But they've also leveraged AIA for their own interests, and they brag about that. I think we probably all could say that about our involvement with AIA to some degree or other, that our participation, our thought leadership across communities really impacts our communities, and the AIA is the credible voice on so many issues. And so leveraging that with our clients, I've seen as great value. And as much as I've tried to neglect my practice this year, my practice has not been as busy and has not had the caliber of clients it's had in at least a decade. So hopefully that is a tale perhaps that encourages others to get into the pipeline of leadership and step up to the plate and share your expertise.
Warren, I see you on the camera. Do you want to say hello?
Hello, Peter. Thanks for joining us here in Utah. We do seem to be in an interesting time here in the state. We are arguably the fastest growing state in the country, which certainly translates into a lot of busy architects. You've commented on the the empowered living, the tiny house competition, and how it has been picked up internationally. How do communities continue to fight that fight about housing affordability and using the whole sort of toolbook and playbook in terms of providing housing options in environments in this time?
Yeah, I mean, I love the boots on the ground idea that the competition embodies, and following through on that and publicizing that, speaks volume to the empathy and commitment that we have as architects to our communities. So, I've been repetitive here and talking about, telling our stories. We've also got to sit and, affect policy change and to be at the table in lobbying communities for more affordability and incentives for that. That's a critical part of the work that we must do. An AIA at a national level, I think in the 2018 resolutions committee has, there was a 2018 resolution on housing that it is precipitating work and action in policies at a state and a national level that hopefully is going to come to fruition. And I can look up some of that work, Warren, and email you. I don't have it at my fingertips right now. But
I mean, it does seem like just a really interesting challenge at this time to keep our communities vibrant and equitable by creating housing choices. This is it's an interesting time in the economics and politically there's a lot of challenges to this, but we're always interested in how a community does manage to stay in front of that almost insurmountable sort of issue.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I'm going to jump in. We've got one more comment and we are down to 2 minutes. RK, go ahead.
Mr. President, good to see you.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks for spending some time with us and your encouraging words. I've been talking recently to gold medalist Ed Masria, FAIA, as he preps to head over to Glasgow.
Yep.
So I just thought as a closing shot, you might want to give us some thoughts about your expectations about what you're going to be able to achieve on that big forum in Glasgow.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for bringing that up. I personally sort of see that as a real highlight of the year, that, and as just to reiterate, the fact that AIA is part of a delegation there. Ed Masria and the 2030 team have been working together and are going to go, well, a couple of weeks before Glasgow, are going to start with a series of press events and then physically in Glasgow with AIA to put our proposals on the table and to be having conversations with the congressional leaders that will be there, with their counterparts around the world. And the last Thursday of the COP, so it's a 2-week event, is Buildings and Environments Day. And hopefully that will be a day where the sound bites are all about the built environment and the role that architects have to play. And expect to see Ed and his team, along with us at AIA, rolling out some announcements and proposals at that time.
Well, good luck, my friend. Be fearless.
It's my job, and I follow in the steps of many previous fearless leaders. So
we're really grateful to have RK here with us. That helps us, but also grateful to you, Peter, to spend some time with you. It's been great. I don't want to hold us too long here, so I think we can close it out. And just thank you for spending some time with us.
Thank you. It is the most profound experience and an opportunity, and I am so proud to be your leader this year. Thank you for the great gift that you've given me as members in electing me to this position.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Peter.
We'll see ya. Thanks, everybody. See you on the next conference session.
Thank you.